Your game can start.
Your game has started.
Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Petchik and Adrian Garzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Pretty good, Mike. How are you?
Doing all right. I start a job in a few weeks, so that's
your game has started.
But let's take care of the upkeep and get into. What were you gonna say?
You don't message me enough for someone who's unemployed.
No, I'm just busy with other things. It's not that I'm unemployed; it's that I'm pre-employed.
Gotcha. Narrows eyes.
Don't worry. We'll have plenty of good discussion tonight to make up for that. So let's take care of the upkeep. First off, this week, as every week, we are brought to you in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art has a variety of tokens, playmats, and dice bags, and art prints from throughout the history of Magic and the world at large. And if you want to jazz up your play space, make it a little bit fancier, perhaps add a certain je ne sais quoi to your evenings of Magic, you can go to originalmagicart.com/commentary, spelled as it is in the name of this podcast, or on checkout, use the affiliate code commentary in all caps. That'll let them know that we sent you, and you'll get a little bit of a discount on your order. So that's a nice thing for all involved. We get, a little bit to keep the lights on here. You get a little bit of money off your order of gorgeous playmats and just stellar products. We stand by them. What do you have for us this week, Adrian?
Hon. I have Le Petit Patreon. For just $1 an episode, you too can hear the full show, including the pre and post shows, as well as getting access to our Patreon exclusive Discord channel, I'd also like to remind everyone the latest episode of Common Area, we will be finally be starting a new cycle of games. Will be out on Saturday the 25th. Hopefully going to have a lot of improvements based on the feedback. A lot of all the videos we've shown recently were from the same recording session, so we didn't, can't go back in time and make some of the fixes, but hopefully they'll be fixed this time around.
I'm excited. I've heard that there are some matches from not necessarily like untiered decks, but slightly more low
Fun.
All right. One last thing before we get into the episode. I'm gonna be at. Oh crap! Never mind. I was gonna tell you. I'll be at GP Providence this weekend. This episode will air after that. Never mind. If I saw you there, cool. If you said hi to me, also cool. Let's move on to the episode.
If you said hi to him and you become a patron, what kind of monster are you?
I just don't know. I just don't know who would do that, Adrian. All right. So let's talk about a deck that 5-0'd and showed up in the league results this week.
We had our recent episode in defense of the jank. And Mike and I always say, if you want us to cover a deck, show us the results. That's all we care about. We're elitist spikes, so that's what we want. Well, boy howdy, did some jank 5-0 today. Black Red Burn by Tominus. Tominus? You decide.
I've given up on trying to pronounce usernames at this point. I'm convinced most are not supposed to be said out loud, and if I do, I'm just going to screw it up. So whatever this user's actual pronunciation for their username is, we're talking about Black Red Burn.
Which is an archetype that you'll recall Mike and I have said will never work. And here it is.
Yeah, it managed to 5-0, which means that obviously you could 5-0 with anything with enough luck pretty much. But I mean, there was intent put into this. This is not, just a pile of cards. There is some actual work that went into this. So we figured we should talk about it, and we could start off just with the creatures. There's 2 Gurmag Anglers is the only creatures in this deck. So 6 and a black for a 5/5 with Delve. This feels weird to me. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, it's a card that doesn't really synergize with the rest of the deck in the same way that you might expect some of the traditional burn creatures to synergize, like the Archer or Thermo Alchemist or even Gitu Lava Runner. However, a 5/5 is not bad in this format. You'll have plenty of Delve fuel for it, and we've discussed before on the show that this is actually pretty tough to answer for a lot of decks. So it's probably fine as a beater, late game beater.
Yeah, I mean, it's... I can see there being awkward games where you have 2 of these in your opener. And since this is ostensibly still a burn deck, you do kind of want to be on the faster side of things. Obviously, we're taking a hit here by playing 2 colors, so it's going to be a little bit slower. But I guess this does kind of give you a late game inevitability. Just slam this big thing and start turning it sideways. But not exactly the most appealing to me. Next, we have 4 copies of Bump in the Night, which is a black mana for a sorcery. Target opponent loses 3 life. Flashback 5 and a red.
And I'm willing to guess this deck does not get to the flashback a whole big lot. It could, but I find that very unlikely. 6 mana is a lot of mana.
Yeah, I think most of the time this is just black opponent loses 3 life at sorcery speed, and occasionally you're going to get value out of that flashback. And when you do, great, but I feel like you're not playing this for the flashback. It's a nice additional factor to the card. 4 copies of Chain Lightning. Everyone knows it. Everyone loves it. It's red for a sorcery, deals 3 damage to any target. Also, I would love to read you the new Oracle text on this. Then that player or that permanent's controller may pay red. If that player does, they may copy the spell and choose a new target for this copy. This is...
hell.
One of these days we're going to get a better version of this, right?
I mean, this card is
Your
from
game
Legends,
has started.
and we have not, so I would say no.
It's frustrating to me because this is probably... I mean, apart from the 4 Lava Spikes, which are also included in this deck, is probably one of the worst Bolt variations, but...
Well, this is better than Lava Spike. Lava Spike cannot do damage to creatures.
That's true. That's true. It can't be reflected, but I can probably, in years of playing Pauper, count on one hand the number of times that clause has been relevant.
Yeah, it's happened to me like maybe once total. For all intensive purposes, it's the same as Bump in the Night. Generally, you don't want to use your burn spells on creatures unless you're losing the game, in which case your burn spells aren't doing a whole lot. So really better at the face.
Yeah. So we also have the 4 copies of Lava Spike, which is a sorcery with the subtype Arcane, which does not matter here. And it's just a red for 3 damage to target player. This is a staple of Modern Burn. It shows up in Pauper Burn all the time. That 1-to-3 ratio is just like the perfect point for a majority of decks. Then we've got 3 copies of Faithless Looting. So red for draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, flashback 2 in a red. This one, I have to feel you are expecting to actually cast this for flashback a lot of the time.
Yes, I think so. And this is actually one of the big reasons we decided to discuss this deck today. Is Faithless Looting just Brainstorm? More at 8.
Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later in the show, but this is probably Red's best form of card advantage. I feel confident in that.
Yeah, so Faithless, I mean, we can talk about Faithless Looting more later. It's a complicated card. It's actually card disadvantage the first time you cast it. The second time around, it's definitely card advantage. And it's a role player. It fulfills a lot of roles. It lets you put cards from your hand into the graveyard. There are lots of decks that want to do that. This deck has a reason for wanting to do that you'll get to in a second. It's legacy playable, it's modern playable, it's Pauper playable. It's a great card. Very good at what it does. And the flashback clause is probably the reason it sees so much play across all sorts of formats. Being kind of similar to a blue spell without flashback.
Yeah, without the flashback on this is probably a fringe playable at best sort of effect. But again, we need a way to actually get to the stuff we care about. This also does fuel Gurmag Angler for what it's worth. Normally 2, sometimes in a pinch 3 if you're not intent on flashing it back. Then we've got 4 copies of Lightning Bolt, of course. We're playing all these bad versions of Lightning Bolt. We've got to play the good one, right?
I want to note to you that this is the only instant in the deck. No, wait, I lied. There's another one. My bad.
Yes, there's one other, but this deck is very much a sorcery speed deck, because following that we've got 4 copies of Flame Rift, which is 1 in a red. It deals 4 to each player. Then we've got 4 copies of a new M19 card, Sovereign's Bite. This was one that we, I think we both panned in our review of the set.
It's basically Lightning Helix.
So Sovereign's Bite is 1 in a black for a sorcery. Target player loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. And as much as we do adore making terrible comparisons to Pauper cards to cards in other formats, this is missing a lot of the things that make Lightning Helix so great.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying if Metamorphosis is Pauper Birthing Pod, this is Pauper Lightning Helix.
That's fair. It has the number 3 on it twice. It does have that going for it. Then we've got 4 copies of Tyrant's Choice, which is a bit of a reader. This is a sorcery out of the first Conspiracy set. Tyrant's Choice is 1 in a black, and it has Will of the Council. Starting with you, each player votes for death or torture. If death gets more votes, each opponent sacrifices a creature. If torture gets more votes or the vote is tied, each opponent loses 4 life. So this is almost always going to be 1 in a black, each opponent loses 4 life. Because if you want them to sack a creature, you vote first. You say,
"Your game has started.
I want death." And if they want to keep their creatures around, they're going to vote for torture, which if you voted for death, they likely have a creature that you want dead. So I have to imagine that every time this spell is cast, it's just doming them for 4, right?
So, yeah. So, traditionally, cards like this, giving people choices is not great, right? Like, that's sort of the conventional wisdom. The card that this makes me most think of is Browbeat. Do you know that card?
That's the, is that the mill one? Or the draw 3, right?
Draw 3. It's 2 in a red, sorcery. Any player may have Browbeat, deal 5 damage to him or her. If no one does, target player draws 3 cards. And I do think this card actually did see play because both modes are good for a red aggressive deck. And in this one, it's probably fine also because even if the vote is tied, you're still going to at least do 4 damage to them, which is what you want to be doing anyway. I think in the past, the problems we've had with this deck are just that it's kind of slow in 2 colors. And then this spell costs 2 mana. You have to tap out to do it on your turn. So I don't know.
I mean, as you mentioned, there aren't a whole lot of instant speed ways to interact in this deck, so I'm not dreadfully phased by the fact that I'm going to be tapping out, because there's value in representing having something, but most of the time you're not going to. I don't know.
Yeah, I just always think of Browbeat when I see this card.
Well, so I think as opposed to Browbeat, where your opponent gets to make the decision, I think that this only actually has one mode in a 2-player game, right? Because if I say Torture, even if my opponent says Death, I'm still dealing the 4 damage. If I say Death because I want them to sack a creature, that probably means they're going to also be able to identify that they have a creature that would be bad to get sacrificed. So they can just vote for Death. So because you vote first, I think that this always is the second mode of this card. Much like how Custodial Lich in our format just reads return target artifact, enchantment, or creature, right? I always forget how many different subtypes it gets back, but it just returns a target out of your bin to your hand.
That's true. So it's always an advantage.
Yeah, I just think that this always reads as 1 and a black. Each opponent loses 4 life. Continuing on the trend of slightly fringy black cards, we've got Alms of the Vein, which is 2 and a black for a sorcery. Target opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. But even though this costs 1 more than Sovereign's Bite, it does have Madness for a single black mana. Adrian, let's talk about this card.
All right, let's talk about it.
Is this actually good?
It's good with Faithless Looting, question mark?
I mean, it's good with Faithless Looting, but outside of that...
You and I have discussed it before. I don't think any of the Blackburn spells are particularly good. You know, one of the big weaknesses of this deck is it doesn't get to play Fire Blast, which I think is a big problem. However, I will say that the more I look at these cards, and I think you said it earlier, there's just a lot more 3 damage spells in this deck than in the traditional burn list, which sometimes has to eke out some incremental advantage via Needle Drop or Curse of the Pierced Heart. So maybe it's not really that bad that this deck can do more damage. If you go Faithless Looting at 3 and then you discard 2 of these and hit your opponent for 6, like that seems pretty nuts, right?
Yeah, I mean that does seem like the optimal sort of situation. I do. And
there's only 2 of them, I guess. Sorry, go ahead.
I do also think just because you're running such a low creature count, you are going to be taking a lot of hits in the early game from incidental creatures. So I do think that Sovereign's Bite and Alms of the Vein help offset that a little bit. I think my hesitance here is the fact that a lot of times I feel this is going to be paying retail for the 3 mana for a 6-point life swing. Which is not stellar. And here's the one. Here's the thing that stuck out to me the most out of this whole deck. Let's talk about Rhystic Lightning. So Rhystic Lightning is 2 and a red for an instant. It deals 4 damage to target creature or player unless that creature's controller or that player pays 2 generic mana. If they do, it deals 2 damage to that creature or player.
So, obviously bad, and I also think this just about the deck in general. It seems pretty bad against Delver, which is looking to leave a mana on your turn, and it can interact with all of your sorcery speed stuff. That being said, this seems good against Boros Monarch, for example, which is looking to tap out each turn. And if you can play this on turn 3 and your opponent's tapped out, it might be one of the strongest plays the deck has.
I think in the Delver matchup, though, you know, it does still kill most of the things in that deck, even if they pay the 2. So I have a feeling that if this gets pointed at creatures, it's going to get countered hard. Or even if it gets pointed at face, I just feel like a lot of the time it's just going to get countered. And I guess...
Look, if I'm an Izzet Delver player, I would much rather take 2 damage and pay 2 mana than waste a counterspell on this.
That's fair, especially given that you don't really know what's in the rest of this deck, because it's kind of an outsider choice.
Well, three damage for 2 damage for 3 mana is very weak. 3 damage for or 4 damage for 3 mana is actually not even the best this deck can do, right? Like this deck is playing Tyrant's Choice, so I don't know. It is definitely a very interesting decision. Maybe they thought that they needed some more instant speed interaction in the deck. I honestly don't know. Because it seems even like you could just play straight up Shock or split the difference and play Lightning Strike over this card, which will always deal 3 damage.
I mean, you could even play Incinerate, which is always 3 damage and makes it so creatures can't regenerate. Like, it's marginally better.
Yeah. I am really unsure about Rhystic Lightning. If Thomas, if you're listening, please let us know what this card is doing, because it's another reason we really want to take a look at the deck. It's playing some very unconventional cards.
And rounding out the spells is actually a rather conventional card for a burn deck. It's 4 copies of Riftbolt, so it's 3 in a red for 3 damage to creature player at sorcery speed, but it does have Suspend of 1 red with it's Suspend 1. So you pay a red, it goes into exile for a turn, and then gets cast on your next upkeep. And then in terms of lands, we've got 4 Bloodfell Caves, 6 mountains, 4 Rakdos Carnariums, 5 swamps. So right away,
yeah,
where's the Bojuka Bog? Bare minimum.
So I agree with you. You could probably get away with 1 or 2 black utility lands in this deck. Maybe Bojuka Bog over an extra Carnarium. The deck doesn't seem mana hungry enough outside of the Bump in the Night flashback to really warrant 4 copies of Rakdos Carnarium. I am not a fan of this mana base. Again, can't run Fire Blast because you're running only 6 mountains. And yeah, I just don't think you need, Rakdos Carnarium for no value, basically. I mean, even Rakdos Carnarium Bloodfell Caves doesn't seem very good.
Yeah, it seems awkward. Now, let me... So we've got the option of the utility lands. How about I offer you a couple of other things that might make Carnarium a little bit more appealing to you? So, starting things off, Flame Jab exists. Just a way to cycle those lands, ping your opponents.
Searing Blaze.
Okay, Searing Blaze, I see. And then also in Retrace, there's also Raven's Crime, the discard a card.
Yeah.
And most interesting for me is Siphon Life, which is 1 black sorcery. Target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life with Retrace on it.
That actually doesn't seem bad. It seems like it's accomplishing a lot of what the rest of this deck is trying to accomplish. So, I actually don't mind that. Maybe as a 1 or 2 of.
It just feels like it would get you a little bit more advantage in the form of bouncing those lands with a Carnarium, and also giving you some level of flood insurance in the late game, because I mean it does kind of counteract the game plan of the late game flashback of Bump of the Night, but this does fill your bin up for an angler quicker. It does help you stabilize by draining life out of your opponent.
It feels like such a slam dunk in this list, even as a 1 of.
Exactly. It just feels like the type of effect that you'd want in here, because it kind of meshes with all these other parts that we've discussed. And I'm kind of shocked I didn't see it in here. All right. Any other land considerations to be had here?
Mortuary Mire seems bad. You have 2 Grimlock Anglers. Don't really need it. Not really a fan of Radiant Fountain in this list. A lot of mana symbols. A lot of colored mana symbols. And, no Prophetic Prisms. So, no, I think we're good on lands. I can't really think of any other utility lands you want to be bouncing, but I do very much like the Retrace idea.
It just seems to fit, especially, like, you saw how powerful Sen's Enlistment was in certain builds of Monarch, just as a way to, like,
I love that
have
card.
stuff. Would you be completely opposed to cycling lands here?
Great question. You could conceivably maybe play an additional land or 2. 19. This deck has 19 lands. It's pretty low. You could conceivably play another land or 2 and have them be like maybe 1 of each, a red one and a black one.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't hate it just as a way to make sure that good quality spells actually show up.
We Faithless Looting, which is Brainstorm.
Yeah, it sure is. So let's quickly cover the sideboard here. We got 4 copies Blazing Volley. Adrian?
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know what to think of it. The rest of the deck is at sorcery speed. Maybe they value it costing 1 less over it being an instant. However, like I mentioned before, this deck does seem pretty soft to Spellstutter Sprite and company, so I would rather it be Electricity.
It just feels like Electricity works better here. Just, again, like the Spellstutter interaction. And like you can get an Elves opponent right before they kind of go all in on something with Timberwatch. Although I guess you're not really blocking, so they're just going to Timberwatch whatever's biggest and most likely to survive. So I don't know. I've never agreed with Blazing Volley over Electricity, but here it is.
Your game has started.
We got 4 copies Chainer's Edict, 3 Geth's Verdict, and 4 Soul Reap. And Soul Reap's the only one of these that should be relatively new to a lot of players. Soul Reap is 1 and a black for a sorcery. Destroy a non-green creature. Its controller loses 3 life if you played another black spell this turn.
So I do want to... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, this is a lot of removal in a deck that I don't think can win as the control deck.
That's what I was just about to say. It's like you read my mind. The Soul Reap deck, the Soul Reap card, maybe it does damage, but yeah, Geth's Verdict, Chainer's Edict, Blazing Volley, like yeah, this deck is coming in broad swaths, which is a topic on an entirely different episode, looking to address creatures. And you're right, shouldn't the burn deck just be able to outrace that?
Yeah, it feels weird because every time I've played against burn, whether or not I was on the more controlling list than burn or a more aggressive list than burn, their plan doesn't change that much. Out of the sideboard, you bring in things like Pyroblast if necessary, and stuff to kind of help deal incidentally with stuff that you have a difficult time interacting with. And again, I don't know if it was a budgetary thing or what the deal was, but I would love to see some amount of Pyroblasts, in the sideboard here. I can't imagine how this deck sort of plays out against a blue deck. I mean...
So, yeah, I'd be very curious to know what this deck matched against. Obviously, it was piloted to a 5-0, which is no small feat, honestly. It's pretty difficult, and even more so when you're playing a deck like this. Would be very curious to get Jeff's take on this deck as well.
Yeah, it strikes me as kind of odd because we've seen this attempted in the past, and I just don't see kind of the velocity here. Like, if you were to build this deck in something like Modern, you could have Bloodghasts and
you'd also the other
guides.
thing, and a big reason to maybe be in black is that you would also have access to stuff like Thoughtseizing Inquisition. So you'd be able to be fairly disruptive as well. As we can see, the modern decks do not run those cards typically. They're typically red, white, Naya even, but very rarely ever black.
Yeah, this and Thoughtseize makes me think like there's no type of duress effect in the sideboard of this deck. And that feels like the type of effect that you might want for certain matchups to be able to, cherry pick a card out of their hands so that you can make sure that your burn spells resolve. Because
I definitely agree. I think that we're a little overloaded on edicts here. So I wouldn't mind seeing some hand disruption. It's terrible against Spellstutter Sprite, which is the card I keep thinking of when I'm looking at this list, which is kind of funny. And then I might replace the Blazing Volleys with the Electricities.
Yeah, and I wouldn't mind seeing some amount of Nihil spell bombs just in case, like even if it's just one, just having some sort of one-sided grave hate.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think in most burn lists, that's not really a consideration because they're extremely fast. But even in this list, Smash Smithereens seems like it would be a good sideboard card.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, basically just cards that maximize your damage potential. And I think maybe that's really our problem with this sideboard, Mike, is that 11 of the cards don't do damage at all. to the player.
And the one that does requires you to double spell in a deck that's running 19 lands, which seems like a bit of a stretch to me. And like I'm looking here at an example of a burn deck that actually posted in the same results, right? The same league results for this week. And I'm looking at the sideboard, and we've got a dual shot, which pings up to 2 creatures. We've got an Electrickery, a Raise to help deal with lands, Molten Rain to also help deal with lands, Seal of Fire to get around Tribe combo, Smash to Smithereens to help deal with artifact-based matchups, and 2 Stagger Shocks. So actually, Stagger Shock is a card that I would much rather see than Rhystic Lightning.
Yeah, this burn list is actually pretty spicy. It's also got a Gut Shot in the main, 4 copies of Fire Blast, but is not running some of the cards. It is running G2 Lava Runner, but not some of the cards I traditionally associate with it, like Gitaxian Probe. I actually quite like this burn list.
Yeah, this one is actually pretty nice. But
should we just cover a regular burn list real fast?
I mean, we could run through this one. Like it's 4 G2 Lava Runners, 4 Thermo Alchemists. Again,
pretty usual creature package.
4 Chain Lightning, 4 Lava Spike, 4 Lightning Bolt. Same thing was seen in this deck that we just looked at. But then we've got the 1 Gut Shot that you mentioned. We've got 1 copy of Magma Jet, the 1 in a red, deals 2 damage to target creature player scry 2. Then we get the 4 Searing Blazes. And I want to talk about this. Do you think Searing Blaze is one of the things that actually sets these decks pretty far apart? Because it's not... It's a burn spell that lets you get rid of a creature, but doesn't waste a burn spell on getting rid of a creature.
I think Searing Blaze is great, especially with G2 Lava Runner.
Okay. So the fact that it can remove a blocker early on and also counts towards the 2 for giving Lava Runner haste.
Yeah, and does 3 damage, so the synergy is a lot better. I will say this deck is missing 4 copies of Flame Rift, but we can get to that in a second, because it's running 4 copies of Fire Blast. Maybe a split of those would be a little bit better, because I don't think you're guaranteed to win every game you draw a Fire Blast. I think your odds go way, way, way up, but I think once you start drawing redundant copies, it gets a lot worse.
That's completely fair. And continuing on, there's, as you mentioned, 4 Fire Blast, 4 Rift Bolt, which was also in the other deck, and then 4 Curse of the Pierced Heart, which I think points to what you were talking about with this black-red burn deck, is the fact that instead of having these smaller damage effects like G2 Lava Runner, Thermo Alchemist, Curse of the Pierced Heart, it's kind of going all in on just like big, meaty chunks out of the opponent.
And I've mentioned this several times. My biggest problem with the black-red deck is really mana consistency. With 18 mountains, you're going to be able to play your spells.
You're going to be able to play your spells. You get access to Fire Blast. You get access to the double red anytime you hit 2 lands for Searing Blaze. We've said it time and time again, like mana efficiency within this format is really, really important, because if you're just sitting there trying to set up your mana base, your opponent can do stuff and you're playing a turn behind. So
I will also say I very much like that this deck is not running any Forgotten Caves, which I think is bad in the mono red list.
Well, so it went up to the full 4 needle drops, which I think probably helps counteract that a little bit, just having more sources of draw that actually advance your game plan. I think that's where that was the justification for cutting Forgotten Cave. So I guess this black-red deck feels to me like it's having a miniature identity crisis, where it doesn't know if it wants to be something similar to Rakdos control list that we've covered in the past, or if it wants to be a burn deck.
I think I agree. I think it wants to be a burn deck. I actually, all right, I'm looking at that list again now. The more I look at it, the more I do like Gurmag Angler, because that's a really good way of like punching in. So I actually don't hate it. Gurmag Angler specifically here. If there was a red delve creature, I'm sure the mono red burn deck would run it, honestly. And yeah, the damage output is a little bit higher, but you don't have the instant speed interaction. Curse of the Pierced Heart and Needle Drop is also, they go together really well. So, you're seeing that little interaction. So yeah, I don't know. I think overall I like the mono red one better, but I definitely think that this deck, props for trying something unique. And I think people, and I sort of want to go here next in the conversation, people are just really drawn to burn.
Well, because I think it's the deck that changes the least over time. Burn decks from 2 years ago and burn decks of today, the creature suite is different, and that's about it. That's the only thing that's really changed. And I think that level of consistency, as well as the fact that, as we've mentioned countless times, it's very portable to other formats where there's a lot of card overlap between Burn and Pauper and Burn and Modern and Burn and Legacy. They all run as many lightning bolts as they can.
Burn is also traditionally very cheap. You know, this mono red deck is only like $16 on Moto, and the black red version is 16 as well.
Yeah, I think there is a budget thing. I also think that it does appeal to a certain player mindset. I think that there are people who just like playing Burn in every format because it just has this very consistent game plan. It's trying to get as close as possible to playing 40 of the same card. And I think to some people there's a big appeal in trying to figure out how to make that work, how to make your deck just as ruthlessly consistent at dealing 20 damage as quickly as possible. And I can respect that. And I think that this black-red burn deck has been cooking for a while. I think that people have been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm not sure if this is the absolute solution. There's a couple other things. Like, I'm kind of frankly just given how people feel about the card in general, and I guess a bit of perhaps misplaced nostalgia, I'm kind of surprised that there's no Blightning here. This almost feels like a deck that would run Blightning as a way to put pressure on the opponent, both on the damage front and also getting rid of cards out of the hand. And
Lightning is 3 damage, right?
Blightning's 3 damage. It is 3 mana. And
do you like it more than Rhystic Lightning?
I mean,
I do.
I kind of do, and my reason here is that Rhystic Lightning, by the time it gets online, I've got to imagine, like, I feel comfortable saying a quarter of the time your opponent will have mana to pay for it. And after the first time they see it, I'm willing to bet that those odds go much higher than if they can't survive, if they can't deal with a Rhystic Lightning, they're going to leave mana up for it when you're about to hit 3 mana. So I kind of like Blightning a little bit more because I feel like on average it probably works out to just slightly less damage and also potentially putting your opponent in a miserable situation, because by turn 3, if you're on the draw, your opponent could have played up to 2, maybe 3 cards out of their hand, which probably means the stuff in there is pretty decent, and I don't hate it here for what it's worth. And I can't think of really any other cards that I would want to try out here that we haven't mentioned already. Because obviously you can't go big on like the black burn spells, and the red burn spells are underwhelming without a way to generate a ton of mana. So I don't know. This just kind of, for me at least, feels like there's a handful of tweaks you could make to it, but outside of that, this might be one of the better black-red burn lists by basis of I don't think it's quite there. Like if they had some way that they could jam in, I just keep thinking back, like, if you were going to build this deck in Modern, the first thing I'd think is, all right, your creature base starts with 4 Goblin Guides and 4 Bloodghasts. Something that gets down quickly, and in Bloodghast case is recursive. So you can just keep applying pressure. And I feel like that's the thing missing out of this list. There's all your early pressure is in the form of spells. There's no recursive damage, and then your trade-off for that is bigger chunks of damage. So I feel like your percentages go way up against non-counterspell decks and dip down against counterspell decks. So it's kind of my feelings on this list as a whole.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
All right, so you mentioned, somewhat sarcastically I might add, that Faithless Looting was Brainstorm. And
That's only because you sent me that article.
I did. I sent you an article by Ben Friedman asking, is Faithless Looting Brainstorm? And before the show, I asked you if you thought Faithless Looting was on a level with the blue cantrips. And I do want to adjust that question a little bit. So we've got the blue cantrips, which are the cream of the crop, right?
Right.
And then we have like green got Adventurous Impulse and sort of those dig through the tops. So let's say stuff like Call to Nature, which is a green to look through the top 5, pick a creature out, reveal it, and put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom. Let's say that's our bottom of like cantrips you would ever consider playing, and we'll put Preordain and Ponder at the very pinnacle top. Where for you does Faithless Looting fall?
So to answer that question, I got a lot to say.
Okay.
Faithless Looting is obviously, I think it's close to the top. In terms of what it can enable, I think it's very strong. Putting cards into your graveyard, a lot of decks want that. It's not like Ponder and Preordain where they just go, well, I'm playing blue, I'm playing these blue cards. It's definitely got more of a deck building cost to it. So I think that that's a consideration, but I think that the decks that it goes into make very, very, very good use of it. I'm thinking specifically of Legacy Reanimator, for example. It's extremely strong in that deck as it's a huge enabler. So in Pauper, I think it is less good, simply because the things we can enable with those are generally less powerful than just being able to play blue cantrips. Izzet Delver does not play Faithless Looting, for example, because the first time you cast it, it is actually card disadvantage, right? You are losing a card to lose two other cards. So the second time around, it's much better because you're flashing it back. The selection is decent. There are decks that I think do maybe get some benefit out of it. People are starting to run it a little bit more in Boros Monarch. And to help give you an idea of where I think it is in that spectrum, I don't think it's at the top. I think it's very close to the blue ones. And I think it and perhaps Ancient Stirrings jockey for position constantly just because of their proven track record in other formats. Ancient Stirrings is actually quite comparable now that I think about it, because its effect is only as weak as the deck you put it into. So, it's extremely good in Tron, for example, even in our format where you're trying to find specific lands, you're trying to find artifacts, but it's awful in a mono green deck.
Okay, so you're basically saying as long as I have a deck that can take advantage of the fact that I'm putting cards in the bin, you feel like this is right there underneath the blue cantrips.
Yes, because, and I sort of mentioned earlier, if you're able to go Faithless Looting, Madness, 2 of these black spells, and then you just get to cast them, like, that's good. Then you didn't really lose any cards. You were casting burn spells you were going to cast anyway at a reduced cost. So then that's 6 damage. Then let's say, this is a bad example, but let's say you discard Tyrant's Choice. You can flash it back later. I don't know if this deck will ever flashback Tyrant's Choice. That's just the one I could think of. It's also good because you can bend some additional lands. So if you get flooded in the late game. So I do think it has its uses.
So I think for me, the reason why I wanted to discuss this is an absurd velocity for a non-blue cantrip in my mind. The fact that
you see 4 cards.
Yeah, and a lot of the time... So a deck like this, I'm looking at it right now. This does not strike me as a deck that mulligans dreadfully well, because it kind of wants to set up a very high density of a certain type of effect. And I feel that every mulligan this deck takes hits it harder than some of the other decks. For example, Blue-Red Delver mulligans incredibly well off the back of the myriad of cantrips, because if you go down to 5 cards in that deck, like, you can... It's not unreasonable for you to win a game with your opponents still playing their 7-card hand, just because of the density of filtering that you have in your deck. And I feel like Faithless Looting in this deck, outside of the Madness and the Delve synergies, I think it's very important to recognize that this is a deck that probably does not mulligan super well, and Faithless Looting is the type of card that lets you get rid of stuff that you don't want now and are unlikely to want in the matchup and get to the good stuff quicker. And I think that article I sent you over earlier, the is Faithless Looting Brainstorm, I think that's kind of the crux of it, is that this is a way to allow you to get away with playing cards that are not as widely applicable in the main deck, or to mulligan into more powerful sideboard cards games 2 and 3. And I think especially for a non-blue color, I think Faithless Looting is, in my mind, the best one-drop cantrip in our format. And I would honestly probably place it right around the same realm as something like Serum Visions, which admittedly does not see play. But I think
only because we have access to the better ones still. Sorry, go on.
We do. But what I'm saying is, if we saw Ponder and Preordain leave the format, people would play Serum Visions, and at that point, I would say that Serum Visions and especially Brainstorm would be very close. Now, obviously, Brainstorm is card neutral. That's one of the best parts of that card, and this is card disadvantage the first time. But you do always have the option for that second chance out of the bin if you need it later in the game, at which point it is just a looting effect. So I think that combination, like as we mentioned earlier, if you got to cast this one time, it would be miserable. This would not be a good card. Like, you're not seeing a bunch of red decks going out and playing Tormenting Voice, which admittedly, just to get ahead of comments, I understand is a different card. Yes, you're trading 2 cards for 2 cards. I know it's not the same order, but
he knows.
Yeah, I think this would put it in a similar place to something like Tormenting Voice, where it sees play occasionally in very specific strategies, but not widespread application. Where I feel Faithless Looting, because in Monarch the graveyard synergies are pretty minimal from what I can call off the top of my head. Like, you can bin a Battle Screech or a Prismatic Strands, but outside of that, and that's what, maybe 4 cards in the main deck, probably 3.
Yeah, I think it's strong there.
Exactly, that's my point, is that even without that extreme level of synergy where you're binning stuff that just kind of wins, a la the Black-Red Reanimator deck, where this pitching Ulamogs and Dragon Fangs can just be game over turn 2. I think that this card is a lot better than it looks or seems in this context. And I'm actually surprised that more decks don't run Faithless Looting on the brewier side of things, because I think if you're not in blue and you can add red to a deck and you're thinking about it, I think Faithless Looting presents a very good value proposition for a lot of these kind of more, strung together with dental floss types of early brews. I think that this card is a lot better than it seems. And
yeah,
I mean, I totally get the card disadvantage argument, but
well, you are getting the selection.
I think that selection is the big thing. Just the fact that you can kind of get away with playing some slightly sketchier cards that have really good situational applications, not like full-on sideboard cards. I'm not advocating like running Relics main deck, but what I'm saying is these cards that, if your opponent is a blue deck and you see that immediately, and you use a Faithless Looting and you rip a pair of the Blackburn spells and you've got enough lands to cast all of them, you're going to keep those, because if you're game 2, they're going to have Hydroblasts. Like, that's how almost anyone would sideboard that match. And by being able to filter into something that's situationally a little bit better, I think is really, really powerful. And I think as patently ridiculous as is Faithless Looting Brainstorm is to say, I think it's kind of true. I think that this is kind of in that same sphere of, I don't care what happens, I just want to see as many cards as I possibly can.
Right.
So I don't know. I definitely like to see this in more brews. That's kind of my big thing, is This is one of those cards that over the years I have come to appreciate, especially over the past weekend watching the Pro Tour and seeing players playing Modern.
Your game has
This card is
started.
absurd in that format. I don't know if you caught any of the coverage, but like the Hollow One deck plays this and it uses it to cheat out Hollow Ones quickly. The Vengevine deck that's tearing up Modern.
Yeah, it's really good, and I mentioned that it's really good in decks that can take advantage of the fact of what it does, more so than the blue spells, which are just generically good.
Exactly. So it does have a slight deck building cost, and I love the comparison to Ancient Stirrings because I think that's a great example of. And I'd argue that Ancient Stirrings actually has more deck building restrictions than this.
Absolutely. You have to be green for one thing.
Well, you've got to be in green, but on top of that, like you have to be a deck that can produce green mana, but also has a ton of colorless stuff that it wants to hit.
Right.
Whereas Faithless Looting is just gimme cards. Like if they're crap, I'll just chuck them in the bin and we'll move on. Like bare minimum, I'm just churning through the top of my library. And I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, one of the issues is that one of the best red decks in the format is actually a blue-red deck, which would never play this effect.
Yeah, it just doesn't care.
It's probably the reason it doesn't see as much play as one might expect, but I could definitely see this being a big player. Like, if, and I don't want to get too heavy on this, if they ban some of the blue cantrips, I think that this card's stock rises absurdly in terms of playability within the format. I guess, is there anything else you kind of want to touch on with Faithless Looting? Because I've been talking for a minute here.
No, I think I like your takes. I like listening to you, but I think that's really, I think you said it.
All right. Well, we're getting pretty close to the hour. Is there anything else that you want to send our wonderful listeners at home off with, or do you want to take us on out?
I'm pleasantly surprised we got as much discussion out of that as we did, to be honest. I thought we were going to have to try and find another topic, but it turns out focusing on certain cards, especially how they impact certain builds, is very productive. So even though I'm not, I am impressed that this deck 5-0'd because I think that some of the card choices aren't really the best. I am glad that it got us talking about a card like Faithless Looting.
Yeah, especially because as of late, results have been trending to a very blue metagame. I felt it was worth talking about something else as a counterpoint to that, and I felt like this deck was a reasonable medium to get to this discussion.
Exactly. And everybody, thanks for joining us today. This podcast is brought to the support of our patrons, especially Zango Trick. Please consider supporting us like them if you like the show. You can check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. If you've listened to this on a platform for reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. / if you've got a deck list, an idea for a topic, please feel free to contact us either via our website or by email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS Pats Games, Mike's LGS JP Comics, and of course L. You can find our theme song Quantitative and other great songs over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary. And here we are. Welcome to Commentary Episode 3. That's me on the left, Color Commentary Matt, and then Aaron Rubin is there on the right. We're continuing our series. This is going to be Boros Monarch versus Is It Delver. We still have not made some of the video recording suggestions you made, namely players don't really show their hands. We'll get to that next time. But we will have the new stream overlay by the time you're watching this. Thank you so much for your work on that, Mike.
Yeah, glad to be upping the production quality on this. All right, so this is one of the sort of grindy, complicated matchups within Pauper. Who do you think there's actually a deck that's favored in this matchup?
I'm not sure. I've talked about it with Aaron at length, and I think that there are draws. I think it's very. It feels very draw dependent. Like sometimes You'll draw a ton of great things as the Boros player, and sometimes you'll just draw Gush as the is a Delver player. And this is one of the few matches where I actually board out the Monarch card because it's actually really bad against Delver. So I think main deck you're a little bit less favored.
Yeah, now that Monarch's moved away from the more tokens in the air sort of plan, it feels really miserable. Like they can steal it away pretty quickly.
So I'm on the play. I play a Galen for my first card. Aaron leads off with a Delver. So this is the nightmare scenario for me. Sorry, I'm like texting someone during this part. But yeah, that's like a pretty bad scenario for me where I am playing a tap land and then Aaron just has a turn 1 Delver, because now I have to kill the Delver, or I have to choose between putting in like a 3-bit Inspector or something.
Yeah, it's not the ideal start for this match, but I think it's recoverable. It's not, you know, everything is doom and gloom out the gate. All right, so let's see if you can't put together something here that starts dealing with this threat before it becomes an issue, because this can very quickly become an issue. Okay, Thraben Inspector.
Yeah, but I wish I had had a turn 1. You know?
Yeah.
That's part of the weakness of the deck. Not getting out my Monarch token, getting out my Clue token.
And it definitely the tap lands are sort of a
Galvanic Blast the Delver.
All right, that gets you back into this game here. That does actually help out, but this Augur is going to be a big old road bump for you.
Yeah, here goes a Preordain. So not the, you know, it definitely helps him out a lot. He was able to replace the card, didn't whiff, and now has a great follow-up for his next turn. So I play a Prophetic Prism, trigger, draw a card. That's pretty good for me. I now have some better mana fixing. And then I play a Forgotten Cave, which is actually a pretty bad sign for me. Forgotten Cave is just... I don't want to be playing that. I want to be cycling it.
Yeah, that's definitely, you know... You play it when you have to, but you'd prefer not to. You do have Metalcraft online reasonably early, so those Gav Blasts are live for the full 4, which is nice. But we'll see what you got here. I'm guessing Journey.
I have a Journey, but Aaron is representing Counterspell.
All right. And doesn't take the bait. All right, so Delver's gone, and
I feel like that's how I win here. So again, playing a cycle lane, a lane I would rather be cycling, not the greatest.
Yeah, this is just rough to watch. You're hitting all the lands that you'd prefer not to at this point in the game.
But I'm still doing okay. You know, my board is getting developed. I have the Prism. I have 3-bit Inspector. I'm at 4 mana, so next turn I could easily play a Battle Screech or the Monarch if I happen to have that. Although, because on this board, Monarch would be pretty good if it resolved. Aaron didn't counter me getting rid of the Delver, so he might not have a counter spell. Although he is going to get to shuffle and Preordain here.
Yep, and this is, you know, not going to get him immediately back into it. That looked like both. Welcome, everyone, to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Petrick and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Oh, you know, good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's cooling off a little bit here. It's not quite so horrible in like the inside of an armpit.
Oh yeah,
so.
What's hot to you, Mike? Just curious.
It's 90 degrees and 80% humidity.
Well, Mike, it's been triple digits in Texas the last 2 weeks, so you know, good.
There's a reason I moved.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a guest this episode. We're going to take care of the upkeep stuff. We're going to introduce our guest, and we will get on with things. So we'll try and keep this short. First up, we are brought to you as every week in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art has all sorts of sleeves, dice bags, playmats, art prints from the history of Magic and art history as a whole. And we just updated how you're going to be able to get a discount. So you can still use that coupon code commentary, all caps, spells it is the name of the show, but now you will get 10% off your order. You can also visit the URL originalmagicart.store/commentary. Again, spelled as it is in the name of the podcast, not all caps this time though. And you will, that'll, you know, let them know that we sent you. So once again, you can still use the same code as you always have. It's just twice the discount now. And they have some sweet new playmats, including
maps of Dominaria, and they actually just got a whole bunch of new prints in. Adrian, what do you have for us?
Well, Mike, this week, as with every week, I'm here to tell you about our Patreon. For just $1 an episode, you too can hear the full show, including our extensive and amazing pre and post shows, and you get access to our patron exclusive Discord channel where it's always a party. I want to remind everyone that on Saturday the 11th, we will have the new Common Area episode up. See the exciting conclusion, showdown, what have you, between Boros Monarch and Is it Delver, and yeah, should be a good time.
Yeah. All right. So we've got those out of the way.
Finally,
Tonight, joining us on the show is Jeff, also known as Any New Province. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, what's going on?
I always feel weird. Are we okay using your actual real name?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
All right.
Yeah, I like that.
So Jeff produces a bunch of content. You stream, and you're probably best known for possibly Pauper Playable.
Is it possibly Pauper Playable? The most cringe-worthy intro of all Magic contents.
Hey, let's not. Man, there's no way for me to make a joke here without offending someone. So you're great.
All right,
you're good. Just know you're not the worst.
Okay. I can take that.
but so you create a bunch of Pauper content, and we're gonna be talking about a couple of things tonight. So we'll get into those topics as we go, but Jeff has some great content that's out there, and he, we reached out to him. We figured we'd have him on the show because he is kind of the resident purveyor of sometimes some pretty deep cuts of jank from throughout Pauper. So we're definitely going to get into that. But first, there was an announcement about Pauper on MTG Arena. So Arena, for those who don't know, is the next new Magic product. It's like MitGo, but with an updated Hearthstone-esque, like, real interface. And they're bringing Pauper to this, but it only has cards from Standard, so it's going to be Standard Legality Pauper. So I wanted to get people's feedback on this and what they felt about their decision to include this particular format for one of these weekend-long events.
Yeah, so for Standard Pauper, I think it's weird because I've been in a feedback bubble for so long where people antagonize Standard Pauper, and I was going to and wanted to create some content with reference to it. So I was kind of delving in and brewing Standard Pauper for the first time, because I know, didn't you guys were part of the Pauper community when Standard Pauper was still a thing, right? When it was still going on before.
I think we were sort of in at the tail end of it. I think I only ever played in one tournament, and it was in Consteros.
Yeah, because it kind of tapered off like shortly after BFZ, I want to say, because I remember there was a period where like, oh no, because the last thing I ever heard about it was when Kaladesh came in, they had to ban Self-Assembler from the format.
Oh wow, yeah, that's crazy.
So I was not aware of that.
Yeah, I guess I was just playing Pauper. I guess I just wasn't playing Standard Pauper at the time. I had access to it because I've been playing Pauper that long. Yeah.
The problems with Standard Pauper are that it really more closely resembles better limited than actual constructed. And I feel like one of the big issues was there were clearly, and I mean, I guess it's not so different from our format, but I think the illusion of format depth is just absolutely out the window when you're playing with Standard Pauper. That being said, it being included on Arena, I think the three of us agree, is actually a really good thing, because it not only legitimizes our format, but it brings people into the Pauper verse. They've heard about it now.
Absolutely.
And I think moving forward, like, we could see, because Arena will continue to get new sets, we could see this like weird spin-off format that is everything from, where does it start, Kaladesh onwards. There could be some weird format that develops out of
kind of
that
like
Pauper card
Frontier
pool.
Pauper almost. I know it's not quite as long.
Don't call it that. We'll doom it right away if we call
Yeah,
it anything.
Arena Pauper.
Yeah.
Arena
Pauper is a much better
go.
name. But no, I'm actually very excited. I don't even mind that they're just doing events on the weekends. I actually did not watch the YouTube video. Are they planning on doing on-demand games of Standard Pauper?
So they're having rotating weekly events was what I took away from it. And one of them is going to be Pauper. They're basically giving us a shot.
Well, my question, I guess phrased another way, is if I logged onto MTG Arena, there is quick play. I don't have to play in an event. Can I play Pauper in quick play?
I believe so,
Yeah, I
but
Because
think so
only
too,
for a
yeah.
limited time.
oh, that's not nearly as good. Because I could see a corner of MTG Arena that if you could play Pauper on demand no matter when, just even like if in Hearthstone where you're just laddering, I think that would be pretty successful. Commons are extremely easy to get on MTG Arena compared to the rest of the cards. I mean, they're commons, and you don't even really need to pay anything to get a lot of good ones. So I'm a little disappointed to hear that you won't be able to just fire on demand whenever you want. Maybe they'll change that.
And that kind of puts me in an awkward position as a content creator too, because if I did, like, I would love to do MTG Arena. Obviously, I won't be able to play actual Pauper on MTG Arena, but I think it'd be really sweet to kind of dive into standard Pauper and have that really cool interface, introduce people to the format that way. But knowing that it's only going to be around for a week, I'll have to dedicate a lot of resources to getting the whole format, like getting every single card, finding popular strategies, and developing content that people want to see with reference to standard Pauper on Arena. But then what if that test week doesn't go well? And
It's not even
the
a full
bottom falls
week,
out.
too.
Oh
It's
no.
just a weekend.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, it's like tempting. Like I think it'd be really cool, but I don't know if it's worth the worry. And if I did do content, would it help it succeed? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's really tough
I
for
have
me
to
to
watch
decide.
this video. I just find it really hard to believe that they have formats on there that you wouldn't be able to play whenever you want.
So they had Singleton on Arena for a while, and then they took it away. And then I saw a bunch of tweets of people being like, "Hey, I've been streaming Arena. I'd love to have Singleton back at some point because it was really fun." And
Mhm.
like, apparently, this is a thing they do. They it's kind of like I've been led to believe through other podcasts that Hearthstone has something similar that I believe is called Tavern Brawl,
Yeah, but that's
where you
that's
have like
not that's
goofy restrictions.
yeah, but that's not what I want. Tavern Brawl is like this Tavern Brawl is its own thing, and the whole point is that it's like you said, it's goofy restrictions. A lot of the times, your deck is just random. Also, you don't even build a deck. So I don't think of Magic in that same way though. So I think when I think of Magic, it's like I want to queue up and play as much constructed as I want. With Tavern Brawl, it's like you do it once, you win the pack, and then you're kind of done.
Ah, okay. It, I don't know. Yeah, it's a little funny how they've decided to treat this, but hopefully it does well. And but yeah, it does kind of leave us in this weird spot where Jeff, you don't know if you want to make videos on it. We don't know if we're going to be able to actually talk about any of it because they're not currently publishing arena results to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. It does really put it in a strange place. But not to say that I don't want to explore it at all and that I don't think people should. But yeah, as content creators, I think we're definitely in an awkward position.
Yeah. All right. So that's neat. Definitely if you're on arena, go check that out. And showing interest in this is indirectly showing interest in Pauper, and every time you do that, Wizards of the Coast does pay attention, believe it or not. And so if you want people to care about this format and you have the ability to support it, go out and do that. That's my spiel. So with that passed, so Jeff, we've got you on, and last week we got to talk about some delightful, terrible jank. And I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about your approach because you are pretty constantly putting out new deck lists that have ranged from really, really like almost there to like some definitely more out there kind of decks. So I kind of wanted to get a little bit of how you approach brewing for Pauper, especially with the fact that I know that you release batches of new videos that are kind of all new commons from standard sets as like your focal point. So I kind of wanted to get a little bit of insight into the process there.
Yeah, so when Possibly Pauper Playable started, it was because back then I did it as like kind of an accountability thing because I was brewing decks around infinite combos. I thought Pauper was this undiscovered format. There were all these cards, and obviously someone missed an interaction somewhere along the way. So I wanted to dig in and kind of dredge that up and do that. But I found myself kind of fixating like on a single kind of strategy combo or deck for a really long time. And at that point I was starting to transition into creating content and thinking, what could be something interesting and kind of fun I could do every week, something new, with the MTG Goldfish kind of format of always putting out new content, sometimes being more exciting than other times. And then I kind of remembered this one weekend where it was just after Bloodbriar was released. I think that was Eldritch Moon, and I remember just goldfishing bad Bloodbriar decks on my deck building app, like laying on my couch or whatever. And I was so fixated on that process, and I was like, what if this is something I really want to do. I barely have played any games with these decks. I don't know if they're good or not. So I kind of took that and said, why don't I go into new standard sets and take all of these cards that people like immediately dismiss without ever trying, and not only try to make them playable in shells that already exist, because we see that happening all the time, but like really try to highlight them, which is an interesting challenge because other jank brewers and video creators, they have rares and mythics that do really cool things and like light up the stack and stuff like that. But I think it's this like great challenge at having underpowered, a card like last week's Take Vengeance. Like I thought that was an amazing challenge to be like, this is a Take Vengeance deck, like it's a bad white removal spell, you know what I mean? So I kind of loved that. I love that every week I get to present this kind of immense brewing challenge. And like you said, sometimes it works out a little bit better than others. But that's one of my favorite parts of it. Is just, I'm probably the only one running leagues with these cards, and I think that's kind of cool.
It is really cool. If I may interject, I think you're doing the community, not to brown nose or anything. I think you're doing the community a great service because you're right. We dismiss those cards all the time. So it is great that someone is trying them out. And also, no one's really doing what you do. No one is really brewing the kind of jank you're making, and that's cool.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that's become like kind of an introspective thing, but at the same time, it's because of how I interact with the community. So if you guys do frequent the same forums that I do a lot of the time, like Reddit, Discord, Twitter, things like that, and you see the same kind of suggestions come up from the community all the time. It's like get a trinket mage in there, you know what I mean? Get a bone splitter in there, or things like that, or why not, let's make this a reanimator deck or something. So I'm constantly even trying to dodge those tropes, like to remain as impartial and as original as possible. And it does hamstring me sometimes, but I feel like the result is like you say, these like weird really original like escape routes decks.
The decision to highlight specifically standard cards is what I think helps you from falling into those traps, because you're right. Suggestions like add trinket mage and bone splitter, those suggestions, like, yeah, people have tried that a lot, you know what I mean? But you're really trying to come up with something new, and I think that focusing really on standard um, is very key. So I think it's a great idea, and it makes me even the more sad that standard pauper might not be a regular thing on MTG Arena. So I'm hoping they change it because I think it'll be a big help.
Oh yeah, no, I'd love for it to. I think it would do a lot for me. I'd get a whole other series out of it, really, and that would be amazing. Like I would love that.
I mean, it looks great. Like arena content is so much nicer to watch just from a visual side of things. And as a content creator, I'm a little jealous of the people who get to play around with that, because it looks really nice. So I guess when one of these standard sets comes out, do you just immediately sit down and go through all the commons and figure out, like, I think I can make these 5 or 6 of them work, and like here's the 4 that are going to take a lot of polish, but I think I can get them there? Or like when new cards are hitting, or is it like a progressive thing where as the duration of a set's sort of release to preview season of the next set, is that kind of every week you're just looking through and you're like, well, I haven't done this one yet? Like what's your approach to that sort of stuff?
So when spoilers are coming out, I'll try to pinpoint stuff. If I can start brewing during spoiler season, that's fantastic. Like if I see a card that really stands out and I can get a deck together, that's a weekend's worth of brewing and testing I might not have to do in the future. I can go out and get pizza with my friends that Saturday or something. So I'll try to do it during spoiler season as much as possible. And then as soon as the set's spoiled, I actually lean on kind of Reddit and Discord and the cards that people are actually interested in seeing. And I'll kind of parse the set for those cards, because everything can go into a bad deck or something, right? So I try to dredge up exactly what people are interested in seeing, and then I'll take that feedback and try to use those cards in brews. But then there's this other interesting dynamic where I want to play cards. I want to spread the power over a season, but at the same time, I have to race people to 5 when they 5-0 with a new card, because it's for some reason, for one reason or another, people are less engaged when I don't brew the deck, which I think is really ironic because I don't consider myself the most like, tuned or proficient brewer, but so I'll try to race people to brewing the new decks before I'm taking out somebody else's 5-0 list, which I personally have no trouble with. Honestly, like, it's a huge boon to me if somebody takes a new card and 5-0s with it. It gets to be like, I can say, look, somebody 5-0 with a card. This is what my series is all about. Let's play with it. But that race is kind of a really funny thing. And then other than those kind of dynamics like spoiler season, interacting with the community, racing people to 5-0s, it's really just like this existential crisis I have at the end of my stream every Tuesday where I'm like, man, I'm gonna have to play with Take Vengeance next week, and I don't know what I'm gonna do.
I mean, so that said, like the decks you manage to put together are usually it's nice that it's not
Your
always
game
just
can
like,
start.
all right, so I've just
Yeah.
put this new card in
Your
as a
game
test
has
slot in like
started.
an
Well.
established deck, and yeah, like the Dawn Galaratron deck, which yes, it does include Take Vengeance. It's not like the game-winning part, but it does synergize with the rest of it, and it's kind of similar to the Ristictron lists in its actual end goal, but it goes about it in a very different way. So I think that's what's really interesting. So I guess, are there any like standouts for you, stuff that you thought was going to work and then just completely fell flat on its face, or like stuff that performed way better than you ever expected? Like, what have been kind of some of the all-time highs and lows in that regard?
Yeah, so my favorite underdog story is 100% the Custody Squire Metalcraft deck. It was just a mono white Metalcraft deck. It looked a lot like Cyborgs. And when I was putting it together, I was like, this is fine. I think it might be okay. And then I ended up 5-0ing with it because Custody Squire, if you can keep yourself alive and defend yourself, you can kind of, or well, that week in particular, that is, it just seemed like the meta was a little weak to 3/3 flyers in Oriok Sunchaser and Custody Squire. So basically, I just lucked into playing some evasive threats with some decent cyborg cards, and then took the deck to a 5-0 just incidentally. So that was my favorite kind of underdog story. I really didn't think much of that deck, and I'm trying to think. And it's funny because there's been a lot of like colossal failures. Dawn Galaratron was one of those. It tested like almost flawlessly. So in testing, I lost almost not at all. I think I lost one match to burn out of like the 6 or 7 test matches I took it out in, and then I just got just slammed in the stream league. And that happens kind of frequently, right? Because the competition scales a lot, and it's a lot of opportunity cost to kind of like run leagues all week to only get like beat on the stream or something like that. So I try to keep it organic, and I try to only practice in the tournament practice room. But there's a real cost to that too, where I'm probably not getting optimal competition. So yeah, so I'd say Dawn Galaratron is the most recent example of something falling flat on its face, and yeah, the rest of them I'm just kind of happy if I eke out a 2-3 or something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, like as long as at the end of the day, like I think it's great that you've set yourself up not as like, we're going to 5-0 with this jank. It's just like, I'm gonna play this. Let's have fun. Like, let's go in, and if we win, great. Like, it worked. But if it doesn't work, like, you know what? It didn't work. It's probably not Pauper playable, and you can move on, which is, I think, like a great setup. So I guess you mentioned, so you do all your testing and tournament practice and then move into the leagues. And do you think that in any way like sort of negatively affects how some of these decks work? Because you're, as you mentioned, you're playing in sort of like a different class of like serious competitiveness. Do you think that that's like in any way negative to the end product, or do you think that like that's just like, obviously I understand we're not all super rich and can just run leagues at will, but do you think that that's in any way, shape, or form like kind of running you into this issue where a deck can perform great in tournament practice, but then when you actually go live with it, it just completely rug out from underneath the feet when the boxing gloves come off?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's 100% an issue. And it was. So I'm really lucky. Like, I just recently got monetized on YouTube, and people have been mega supportive on Twitch. So anybody that's out there that's doing it, thank you guys. It's amazing that happened at all. So I have enough resources to kind of get back in the black, and and actually start running leagues with decks. The only deck I ever did test in a league was mono red land destruction, because I had this real intimate, passionate weekend with mono red land destruction. I wanted it to look really good. So I was like, I'm going to take this out in a league and I'm going to see like how it performs. And I incidentally did well that day, but I think it's because the challenge was going on at the same time. So there was a lot of people, I blew up their first 2 lands and they would scoop or whatever. And I didn't get to try the weird card advantage suites and stuff that I included. But yeah, I would love to do that with every single brew I make. Like at least take it into one league to just test it against the meta, and see what happens. But that's kind of a toss up too. Like one of the things with tournament practice is that there's no risk in ending a game you're obviously going to lose. So with Dawn Glaretron, if I get to turn 3 and I was at 4 life, like there's a really high chance that I was going to lose that game. So it was possible for me to just scoop, move on, start another game, start another match, try a different matchup, and see what I can change based on that. But I don't think that's worth it. I really do think to ideally brew, you should be brewing against the meta you're going to be playing against.
Yeah, absolutely. It's how you get the reps in, not only against the right decks, but player quality. Lost my train of thought.
I mean, I guess. So you've got the example we featured a while back, the that escape routes deck that you came up with. Are there any other cards like that are not current but have kind of like fallen to the wayside and are just neglected and you think could potentially work? Or is that kind of a standout, like weird? Because in our episode we definitely discussed it as being on a similar axis to something like Tortured Existence. So I'm just kind of curious about like when you reach back a little bit into these older cards, is there like a big old database you've got either in your head or physically typed out of like weird jank that you think could work? Or is it just kind of whatever comes to mind that particular week?
No, that's actually what I live on, is the jank bank. I just got it up in my brain, and it gets me to sleep at night. Sometimes it stops me from being hungry in the morning. No, I do. I have the kind of this encyclopedic knowledge of really bad cards that could potentially enable a combo if something ever came out. And I know them more for their effects, like how you might be able to parse them in like Scryfall or something like that. Like there's a skeleton that I believe costs 5 mana. You can pay 2 mana to get a white creature persist. I think it's like a 2/2. Like it's pretty bad, but like, what if you gave, Miss Moon Griffin persist? That's like reanimation on a stick. What if the thing you reanimate puts a counter on the Miss Moon Griffin? You can keep looping the persist, reanimating the stuff out of your grip. You know what I mean? So like, that's one of them. And then Thermopod is the closest thing we have to Ashnod's Altar, unfortunately. So that's a 5 mana, I think it's lucky enough to be a 3/3, but it might be a 3/2. And it's got like pay 1 snow mana and give it haste, because that's what I want to do with it. And you can sacrifice a creature to add red mana to your mana pool. So that's the only way that, besides like instants and sorcery, so that's the only permanent that we have access to that can repeatedly sacrifice something for mana that isn't a goblin, because we have Skirk Prospector that does that. So if you may could get real janky with it and turn something into a goblin. So those are my 2 favorite ones. Bramble Elemental is really cool. Whenever an aura gets attached to it, you make 2 plant tokens, sacrifice those to Thermopod, bounce a Crown of Flame, put Crown of Flame back on Bramble Elemental, sack the token. You know what I mean? So you get these, you find these weird things. And the way it started for me is I would just look up, untap, just the keyword untap in a search engine, because I was around for the advent of Peregrine Drake and Cloud of Fairy. So I was like, obviously untapping stuff is completely broken. so that's how it started. And then eventually it kind of led into, sacrifice, add mana, kind of like those keywords.
What do you keep? So in that same vein, when you're looking at a new card, what are you looking for? Are you looking for untap, add mana? Like, what to you is like, wow, this card is obviously like something I want to play with?
Yeah. So there's a couple things I want to talk about with that. So right now, I don't really feel super spoiled as the guy that plays all of the new standard Pauper cards in the Pauper format. There are some that are very good. Like Elvish Rejuvenator stood out to me just because it puts a land directly onto the battlefield untapped, which is a super powerful ability that we don't see very often. We've seen it with like forests and things like that. So novelty is something I'm really looking for. Take Vengeance was interesting, but we'd seen it before. And I'm just using that as an example. I guess Gearsmith Prodigy was interesting because we don't have a lot of 1 mana 2/2s in blue and stuff like that. So other older standard cards, like the cards I've covered already, I'm looking for just novelty, just things that are different, even if it just costs a little bit less. Like Demonic Vigor cost 1 mana, and every other black aura we've had that's recurred a creature has cost 3 or more, I think was what it was. But it put it directly back onto the battlefield, like Angelic Renewal. So really just novelty. But I've got high hopes because Wizards has kind of noted that they're developing for Pauper now. So I think we'll get some of those cool engine cards kind of coming.
Do you? Sorry, and this. How many cards are you typically looking to play in a given set? Like, obviously, you're not playing everything, right?
No way. So there's so many weeks until we get a new set released, right? And it kind of becomes feast or famine at some point. And I see it as just like, this is going to get more challenging, and I'm going to have to build a deck that is either going to be objectively bad, which I try to avoid, or I'm going to go to the 5-0 results. I'm going to find a weird janky deck. You know, people are talking about it. It's interesting. I'll take that out for a week and just save people the punishment of watching me 0-5 with a deck that plays something like Crippling Chill. You know what I mean? But I'd love to go examine kind of those engine cards, the combo cards I was talking about before. But I don't know.
And
if that's
I actually have another follow-up question. You got me thinking all sorts of lines now. Get to Lava Runner. Did you think that was going to be good? And what do you think of it in the burn deck now?
No, so it's weird, right? Like I talk about the feedback bubble thing. So we have like a comparatively small community. Like the voice of reason is often kind of drowned out, where somebody might say, you know, this could be really good in burn, and we instantly have like the 8 people who are obviously going to antagonize that and be devil's advocates. And so I'm reading through these Reddit threads and I'm getting discouraged about cards, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, you know, it's garbage guide, you know, this goblin's gonna be bad. Granted, I played with it a few times. I don't think it's like groundbreaking or anything like that, but I really appreciate that people are comparing it to Firebrand Archer, talking about why it's better, and talking about what it can do. But it is a little unfortunate that we're subject to all of the negative discussion, and it takes some rogue brewer who hasn't read any of that to 5-0 to really open up the discussion again. Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't really have the breadth of feedback that other formats do, and I feel like that affects me a lot. I'm trying to
Mike, you got to be more positive about new cards.
Well, not necessarily, right? Not necessarily. Like you guys are only one source. Like it's a scientific thing, and people are entitled to their opinions, I guess is what I'm saying. But when I do my homework, I just like to have more opinions to look at. You know what I mean? Like more facets of opinions. I would never try to change somebody's mind about a card, except when I take it out.
Except right now, or I want you to tell me what card we've been wrong about.
Oh my goodness. I don't even think. I think we got the wrong guy for that job.
Well, there was one not that long ago that we
admitted we were there's a lot of
about.
cards we're wrong about.
Yeah, and like I honestly like I can't pinpoint it. I don't know if you guys, because you guys have like an optimistic point about a lot of them anyway, right?
I tend to have an optimistic point about a lot of them. Adrian's the realist who goes, this is bad, don't do that.
Yeah, so there is 2 facets kind of with you, and maybe that's part of the reason why I enjoy listening to you guys so much, because you do get the whole kind of spectrum of what could be possible with a card. But I can't think of anything discreetly like that. I was listening to a set review and I was like, oh, I'm gonna nail these guys with this one.
Yeah, if you ever do, please let us know. I would love to hear
be fair.
Yeah.
to be fair, there was a period brief. This was before the podcast, and looking back on it, I think the wrongest I've ever been, and this is honestly, I think worse than the time that we goofed up on Peregrine Drake. I honestly didn't think that Gurmag Angler would see the variety of play it did at the time. When it was about to release, I was like, yeah, it's okay. Like, right, like it's going to be like
to be fair, Mike, I don't think anyone realized how busted Delph was. And then, yeah, because think about like Treasure Cruise, which is banned.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But it was one of those things where like we had Treasure Cruise in the format for a while, so like I don't get the out of like, oh well, we didn't really know. It was like, no, people were jamming this in every deck that played islands or even just a blue source. So it was like, I feel like that was one of the greatest times I goofed up when I saw a card. I was like, yeah, it's fine. Like it's just a 5/5, and then it was like, oh, okay, this is half of the stuff I'm going to see for the next 4 months.
The card I've been wrongest about was actually the Eldrazi. Back right before Eldrazi Winter, I was like, why would anyone play this dumb colorless deck? But that was back when it was still like
Jeez,
a mono
wow,
black
that's
deck and was like trying to use Relic to abuse like Blight Herder and stuff. It was before the white version really came out, and I was
okay.
just like, this deck is so
Oh.
dumb. Who cares? And then the Eye of Ugin interaction, blah blah blah. So
Yeah, that was a cool time.
So I guess something that I'm interested in is, do you have like a list of like kind of half finished shells at this point? Because you were talking about some of these cards that you know of from back in the day of questionable quality that you wanted to build a deck with. Do you have like, like a 45 card list that's just waiting to get filled out with a couple of other things, or do you just kind of have those on the back burner until you feel more sure about like
Yeah.
your ability to put together a full 75?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I don't have decks formed around them. It's more of like a meditation tool for me at this point because they're all really bad. And like my criteria is that it isn't really about even the 75, because if you think about Peregrine Drake, right? Like people were running it in Izzet lists, people were running it in Tron lists. Like it was, that combo could fit in a lot of things. And a lot of those cards that I was talking about are combo pieces. Like that's what I really like to ruminate on when I'm not thinking about my in my series and stuff like that. And because they don't serve the series, it's almost as if I'm just waiting until that gets down to a 2-card combo or a 3-card combo, and then that's when it's time to pull the stops and build the deck. Because I think wasting my time building the 4 or 5-card combo built around these cool cards that I care about, like I've done that before. I was doing that before I started these series, and it's kind of fruitless. You just get your butt whooped by blue black and mono black in the tournament practice rooms for a couple weeks, and then you give up. So my floor for combo decks like that, I always think about things like Rallygon or Tireless Drive. If that's what it takes to break through, and not even with Rallygon necessarily. I think it's a really great deck, but a lot of people have said it needs a certain meta to survive. So if my combo is going to make a 75 at some point, not for the purpose of content creation, then it's going to have to beat Tireless Drive or Rallygon, and it's going to have to do a good job at it.
Yeah, that's fair, because I definitely know that we're guilty of a lot of the time on the show just like talking about a deck, and at the end of the deck tech kind of just saying, well, why wouldn't you just play X instead of this? And I definitely feel like if I was just sitting around brewing stuff all the time, there would that feeling would definitely sink in after a while, that it's like I should just be playing this
now
other deck. Like I'm making a bad blitz, or I'm
now
making a
I
bad
want to
stompy
I want to
deck.
get into our
And
own time of loving the jank, Mike. As you may recall, there is a certain brew that is very near and dear to our hearts. So near and dear, in fact, that we actually have played it on camera and it is on our YouTube channel. I'm talking, of course, about Pig Trinket. So I'm just saying, that's a deck where
oh
easily people
yeah,
could say, well, why don't you just play, I don't know, literally anything else? But we liked Pig Trinket.
we did, and we had a good long run with it. But it was never great.
But it was so
It was
much fun to
just
play. So
good.
yeah, it was so much
was.
fun to play.
So I guess something that has been kind of coming up sort of incessantly in these guest interviews. So there's and I think part of this is the fact that Pauper is starting to see a little bit more time in the spotlight, with larger and larger events being scheduled for it in the paper world. There's always this question of the fact that we are an ununified format, where there's this handful of cards that you can't play in Pauper because it's not legal on MitGo, and most of these large events are using the MitGo list. So I guess my question for you, Jeff, is: have you looked through those 400 odd cards, and is there one in there that you know of that you just really want to get your hands on and play around with?
No, Michael, I'm so glad you asked. If you're from Wizards and you're out there listening, tell me who I have to send a pizza to, or where I've got to put the sign for you to make Ashnod's Altar available as a Pauper playable common on Magic the Gathering Online. Because
Okay,
it
so
was printed as a
I'm super
common.
interested.
Like,
I'm super interested. Why Ashnods? I cannot figure out how to combo with that thing.
The possibilities are just endless. Like you sack a creature, get 2 colorless mana. Use that 2 colorless mana to give a white creature like Miss Moon Griffin persist. You regenerate something out of your graveyard, it puts a counter on the Miss Moon Griffin. You make infinite mana. You got Ashnod's Altar on the back. But no, it's just I just feel like that's got to be my card. that's the jankiest combo enabler that hasn't seen the light of day. There's other ones. There's like this healer card, which would be really great with Epicure of Blood. You pay like 1 colorless mana, exile a card from your graveyard, gain a life. Epicure would trigger. So there are niche cards that would be good for the series and stuff like that. But no, Ashnod's Altar.
Well,
I'm ready to die on that.
I
hill
don't
right
know
now.
if it would be. I think that someone would find a way to break that card. That card is janky only because our payoffs are common. That card is insane in other formats.
Yeah, sack your 2 spell stutter sprites in response to Electricity, pay blue, Gush, hard cast Gush with Ashnod's Altar. I mean, clearly it's too good.
Look, I'm just saying.
Oh man, like
good mana like that, like fast mana, that's always going to be good somewhere. So I guess not High Tide. I lied.
Mhm.
Not in our format.
yeah, I mean, High Tide is probably still very good if it wound up sneaking into the format. It's probably just not broken. There's probably something to do with it.
I think there's another one too. There's a creature. It's a black creature. I think it costs 2, and you can tap it to sacrifice an artifact to add mana to your mana pool equal to its converted mana cost. And I can't remember what he's called. Soldevi Acolyte, maybe, or Soldevi something or other. Anyway,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
There's a couple.
There's
a couple of those now. Because there's a I think 2 of them, and they're both black. And then there's also that green 1-use one that you sack a creature and you get that much. It's CMC +1 of any color of mana.
Yeah, Metamorphosis. That's out now. I tried to brew around that when that got released on Magic Gathering. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Oh man,
no, we
did. I
did.
That? Hey man, I was trying to ride that train. I had it in an Emerge deck with Cathodian as kind of the main, and Sky Shroud Cutter as well. So you can play Sky Shroud Cutter for free by letting your opponent gain. It's some ridiculous. I think it's 4 or 5 life or something. But it costs 4 mana. So you can go Forest, Sky Shroud Cutter, Metamorphosis, Sky Shroud Cutter, play a 5-drop on turn 1. So it's like impossible to set up, but I tried it. Shucks, I sure did.
Okay, so I actually have open like a list of all these assorted cards. I'm gonna just pitch some of these at you, and I kind of want like an idea if there is one. So are you familiar with Blazing Effigy?
Yeah. the only effigy, right? That's the only common effigy, the only pauper legal effigy.
Yeah. So for folks at home, it's 1 in a red for a creature. It's actually an elemental. It's been errated.
It has the 5th official Lord of the Rings printed in its text box.
Oh yeah, this is a reader. So it's from Legends, and when it dies, it deals X damage to target creature, where X is 3 plus. Oh, it just says creatures. Okay, never mind. I thought it was creature or player.
Hey, put what was that card? People were brewing Ragged Veins on something. Sack some effigies.
Oh no.
GG.
So you can chain your effigies together, and maybe like, I don't know. I guess you could like supernatural stamina.
Yeah, this is
halfway through.
This is gonna be worse Zuberas. We should just. There's only 1 effigy. Like why?
Oh yeah, it specifically says cards named Burning Effigy. Like it only cares about like you can't trick it into getting anything more.
No, it's creature type effigy. So I guess you could use like changelings or something, but yeah.
But then they'd have to deal damage. It's just it's this big old nightmare. Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to think of these other cards, because a lot of these are like kind of right in your realm of just out there enough.
It's also got Susan Van Camp art.
Because yeah, good old Susan in her very iconic style. Soldevi Adnate is the one you were thinking about, the black or artifact creature.
Yeah.
Because I remember back in the day, I tried to figure out a way to make Tron work with Pestilence, and I could never get it to click. Because there's there is a way to filter colorless mana into black mana. It's Bog Initiate, which is a 1/1 that you can pay 1 generic mana and get a black mana out of it. So there are options. It's just always kind of the struggle, and this is what happens every time I sit down and try and like brew an idea out.
Yeah, it's the tragedy of adding a card, right? It's like, oh, I could do this if I just had this, and then and then you're already 1 card more than tireless trap combo. So it's kind of you know what I mean. So it is. It's kind of the tragedy of brewing combo in Pauper. But we've seen 3 and 4 card combo, get there. I'm pretty sure like any Ghostly Flicker combo is 3 cards, and I'm pretty sure Familiars, which is championed by 420 Dragon, that ends up having to be 4 cards to actually combo off and win, right? But one of those cards is an island sometimes, but you do need 4 cards, right? So it's they can get there. But I don't think Blazing Effigy is the one I'm putting all my eggs in a basket for.
That's fair. I did think that it was any target, because if it was any target, then I could see a way that might work.
Yeah,
it probably is just worse Zubera's, but So I guess you keep referring to combo. Is that kind of where you naturally are drawn to with these kind of more out there cards? Is that just kind of where your mind goes to, that I think I can combo with this? Or because we've gotten all these weird cards lately, like kind of smattered into the treasure chests. Is that kind of the combo bait stuff, or is that just where you kind of naturally wind up with Magic decks in general?
With new cards, I'm always thinking about possibly Pauper playable, and like, is this something I can put into a deck and actually win a few Is this card possibly Pauper? You know what I mean? Like, so that's my relationship with new cards. But old cards, I've been getting a little bit better at evaluating them kind of on face value as I've gone back. I think most of the ones I've talked about today, those are kind of like, those are the ones I think of that they actually get me to sleep at night. I'm like thinking about how to combo with Mistmoon Griffin, but now when I'm going through things, like I think the most recent example I can think of is Silver Drake. So I was building Court Hussar decks. I came across Silver Drake, which is 1 white-blue for a 3/3 flyer. You have to return a blue or white creature to your hand when you cast it. So it feels a little bit like a worse core Skyfisher. And I was thinking, like, it's a 3/3 flyer for 3. It recurs a permanent. We've seen cards like this, similarly costed, that are really powerful. Like, does this go somewhere? But it seems like those cards that I have pinpointed, and I'm like, oh, I'll come back to this someday. They never really seem to make my series decks, because possibly Pauper playable, like, I have to use established, very powerful cards to try to carry weak kind of newly released cards, so those ones that I want to try out, they usually take a back seat. But yeah, combo is one of the places I love. Combo decks, combo is super fun, but that's only because that's how narrow my scope used to be in terms of Pauper and how something's powerful. It was like really zeroed in on Cloud of Fairies and Peregrine Drake are the best cards in the format. I'm gonna find something like that.
I mean, to be fair, that is kind of the history of Pauper, is very powerful combo decks that eventually need to be banned. Like we've had Storm, we've had Infect, we've had Drake, we've had Fairies. Like, all of our ban list is just, this enables a stupid combo, you can't play it anymore. So that makes sense. And we've talked before at length on this show about how Tireless Tribe is, there's no logical reason that something this rickety should work, but it does.
Man, I actually love that deck. Like, I don't know if people see me play against it. Like, every time someone resolves a circular logic that they cast for Madness by discarding to a Tireless Tribe, I'm just like, oh, the cogs, they're turning, it's beautiful, and I hate it, and I'm gonna die, but it's wicked.
Yes, circular logic, the card they always have when I can interact with it. It's always,
that's one of the
decks
decks that I think is the most Pauper to me. I don't know, because it is janky.
No, it really is. Like, how it's all the powerful blue cantrips, gush to get enough cards in your hand to discard to a white creature that you're running 2 planes.
And I actually think you hit the nail on the head. It just has the best cantrips, and it's a deck that abuses them really, really, really well, because Gush is essentially like 4 cards for that deck. It is kind of elegant in the way that it's janky, the way that it abuses these extremely powerful blue cards.
Yeah, it seriously is like my Starry Night, like, it's incredible. Like, I love playing against that deck, even though, I think somebody, I don't know if it was Links to the Past or R&D Function, they're a brewer from the Discord. I know they post on Reddit sometimes as well. One of the people behind Pestilence, I think it was them that said, Tribe is one of those decks that either looks completely unbeatable or completely unplayable. and I love it. I love it either way. I love it.
It definitely has some times where it just sits there and, like, casts a ton of cantrips, and every so often it'll catch me off guard, and I'll just be like, "What is this person doing?" And it's like, "Oh, I'm dying on the next turn, aren't I?"
Yeah.
Like out of nowhere, this is done.
Yeah, that dead cell
Um,
is just turn 1 Evolving Wilds Gataxian Probe, and it's like we're playing Tribe right
It
now.
it can also turn. I think it can turn 2, right?
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
if they just luck into it and you have no interaction, they can just straight up murder you turn
Mhm.
2.
And generally they will.
So I guess when you're working on these brews, what are kind of the sort of safety cards? Because you mentioned sort of propping up some of these jankier things with established good cards. Is like we all know the obvious ones, like you play your cantrips in your blue decks and you play all this stuff. Is there any other sort of like staples that you think more people should be getting their playsets of if they're really into the idea of brewing?
I don't think it's underrated at all, and people probably already have, but like Core Skyfisher, like I have my bad decks have won games on the back of Core Skyfishers that they would have no business winning otherwise. Like Core Skyfisher resetting a Kabira Crossroads or something like that. You know what I mean? Like Core Skyfisher is one of those carry cards. Gurmag Angler can be one of those carry cards if you really like need it to be. Though I prefer for it not to be. So yeah, so Core Skyfisher is definitely one of them. I would say Spell Stutter Sprite, but that doesn't. I'm trying to actually get away from that because whenever you're going to play a Spell Stutter Sprite deck, generally you'll have Fairy Miscreants and Ninja of the Deep Hours, and like, are you really not a Delver deck at that point?
Yeah.
So that's another one of my favorite kind of carry packages, and I have a couple of cards I'm trying to highlight, like the new card. Like I did this blue black fairies brew that used Dream Spoiler Witch, I think is what her name is.
Oh, the one with instants.
Yeah, exactly. So whenever you cast an instant,
Yeah.
give a creature -1/-1. So I just jammed the fairy package in with that, and like a couple of other, I think it was Moment of Craving was the instant I was highlighting at that time. So it's decks like that. I'll use the fairy package. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Just like burn, like Lightning Bolt and Firebolt. Like those cards, you can kill somebody with a playset of both of those. Like I think there's something understated about how effective just having 20 points of burn in your deck can be. If everything else goes badly, your opponent removes all your creatures, but you still somehow manage to sneak through 20 points of burn somehow, or like get a 2-for-1 off a Firebolt. Like I'm actually a huge fan of both of those cards. And I know maybe I shouldn't be, but yeah.
No, I mean they're good cards. Like that's part, like having a way to go face is part of why we've seen Boros Monarch become the deck that it is. And I guess kind of on that note, are like, I know since you're playing such a wide variety of decks, it's going to vary from time to time, but are there what do you kind of view as the boogeyman of the format that you're always just not looking forward to playing against? I know you appreciate Tribe, but like, is there that one deck that you just know every time you run up against it in a league, you're like, all right, here it goes? Or is it kind of dependent on what the flavor of the week is?
Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of depends on the week. It depends on if I'm trying to prey on something. I think Mono Blue Delver though, Mono Blue Delver kind of takes the cake. That deck is ridiculous. There are some decks that can perform really well against Scred Delver because they have awkward mana draws, and I just think a lot of decks, maybe besides like Mono Green Stompy, I think a lot of decks just fold to a good Mono Blue Delver player. And it's just that's another one of those really like eloquent decks. It's like, well, I'm trying to maintain this guise that Pauper is an unsolved format and like, suspend disbelief that I'm going to break something with a new card. I always go back to like Mono Blue Delver, a deck that's existed and been tuned since, Mono Blue Control back in like the early 2000s or whatever. Like that deck has been getting good and getting better since the format began. So it's kind of like one of those things that I'm always afraid to run into. And I'm like, is this person really good at Mono Blue Delver? And are they sandbagging, like a Vapor Snag to win the game right now? Like that, I think that's my boogeyman is Mono Blue. But it's not, but not to the point where I don't want to run into it. It's a good litmus test.
No, that's all fair points. Man, I just had to look through all the fairy options, and there's some interesting stuff. And I did, just for viewers at home, misquote Dream Spoiler Witches because it's just casting a spell during an opponent's turn.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah. It can have flash as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my favorite one was oh man, the other half of the Splinter Twin combo.
Pestermite.
Pestermite. Yeah. So that was my favorite one. I did misclick and use Pestermite's ability wrong, but you can really get people like cast your Pestermite, untap a Karoo land, cast a Think twice or whatever, and yeah, that was my favorite card in my build of it.
Oh man. So when you're not playing these sort of rogue decks that you have for your channel, what decks do you play? Like, is this everything you do in Pauper, or is there the thing that you play when you're just like, all right, I just want to play an established deck that I enjoy?
No, I generally play decks that are worse than the ones that actually make it to the stage for possibly Pauper playable. So you think some of those are bad, then you should see what my Saturday mornings look like.
I was going to say, how many revisions do these things go through? Like
A lot, like kind of an embarrassing amount. Like, well, maybe not. I don't know. This is what I do, right? So yeah. So I'll block off pretty huge amounts of time and just tune a deck down. And sometimes I just throw stuff out. Like the first time I tried a Dream Spoiler Witch deck, it didn't make it to see the light of day, and that was when Burnt Offering first came out. Like it was okay, but Burnt Offering was never better than Dark Ritual. So I played 6 matches, let's say, in like the practice rooms, like junked it, moved on to something else for that week. So they do generally see a ton of iterations. Like I'll play anywhere between like 10 and 12 practice matches kind of on between Friday and Saturday, preparing to record a deck tech on Sunday night, and then sometimes Sunday morning, like I just got nothing and I'm just jamming jamming tournament practice matches until I've got something that I can commit to video. So it kind of depends. If a deck's really good, like if I actually feel confident in it, maybe I'll take some time away and I'll take a little time off that weekend or something. But yeah, usually a ton of iterations, most of which are bad.
I mean, that is as someone who's been playing Magic for well over half his life, that does not surprise me. But I guess for people who are getting into Pauper and kind of want to follow this path of like trying out new things and brewing decks, is there any sort of advice that you'd have for those people? Because we occasionally get that question, and I'm always kind of like, just play good cards, or like take an existing list and tweak it a little bit. Like I'm not sitting here trying to break the metagame. So maybe is there any advice you could give for those people who are kind of looking to break into this?
Yeah, be really open-minded. Like don't get stuck. Like go out there and consume content like this podcast, and like the guys over at Common Knowledge, and YouTubers like the guy that does Pauper Ponderings there, and like other Pauper players, people that are established pros. Like how are their lines? Do some of your blue cards line up with the way that those pros are playing? Can you take advantage of things the way they do? And like go back further too. So like go watch Magic the Gathering strat videos from 2001 and just get really deep into it, you know what I mean? And just consume as much as you can. Just recently I posted one of my Reddit articles talking about how I was digging into MTG Salvation's old archives. Like that's a really great resource too. Like go back and consume as much as you can. Just keep getting it in, bringing it, like as much as you can, absorb as much as you can, and then when you have time, build a deck. Don't build something super flimsy. Our meta is, I wouldn't like, it's fairly established. There's strategies that work. Learn from those strategies. Use those strategies to prop up the cool things you want to do, and then eventually kind of try to branch out from that. Try to use all of that information to kind of build something unique, like towards your play style, and then like break through, because that does happen. Like Mono White Heroic is a new deck, and very few of those cards were popular before that deck came to be. So like I guess mutagenic growth, and that's kind of a no-brainer. But yeah, so just consume as much as you can, listen to other players, participate in communities, and yeah, use all of the information those people have to take your card that you really want to highlight. And
Jeff, our format doesn't deserve you. That was beautiful.
That was more heartfelt than I think anything we've ever put on this show, because usually you can follow your dreams, or you could just play a real deck. Is like kind of
well,
kind of how I feel we come off sometimes.
And I feel like, I don't know if I should give myself credit, but I feel like part of this whole renaissance is like, I think I started a little tiny ripple somewhere deep in the bowels of the Pauper community that said like, we've got Johnnies too, there's Johnnies in here. We just want to be Johnnies and Timmies. Like it's not all spikes in the Pauper format. And that's it, right? Like my mentality is the Johnny mentality. It's about finding a way to do that cool thing. Whereas a lot of other people, are Spikes, and that's cool too. You can be Spikes, you can be Johnnies, you can be Jennies, Spikes, Timmies, like do whatever you want. But I feel like it's important to let Wizards and the community at large know, like, you can be a Johnny and play Pauper if you want. Like every format is going to have those people. So I'm trying to be like the poster child Johnny, and I'm yelling real loud about it so that hopefully other people hear it. We get more Johnnies and people just having fun playing Magic the way they want to,
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really admirable. And that's kind of part of the reason I wanted to have you on the show for a while, is because we, have been maligned by some as quote elitist spikes about our podcast, and I do really like I do watch your content. Like I really enjoy watching like what is out there and seeing the far extremes of what this format can be, because I have played it so long. Like I understand the matchups, like the the blue red Delver Boros Monarch matchup is an interesting matchup, but it's situationally interesting. Like I know the things that occur in this matchup, and like if I watch footage of that, like I am probably not going to be surprised. I'm probably not going to see new lines that I've never seen before out of either of these decks. So I definitely did want to get kind of the other perspective, because I definitely feel like at times, barring last week, this show definitely gets into like the more competitive side. And I did want to show people that like there's more to the format than just 5-0ing leagues and like trying to utterly optimize a 75 to like beat the meta game. But yeah, I definitely do appreciate that this is still very much alive and well, because decks don't come from nowhere. There's no deck that's just like suddenly appears. It's someone sitting there and brewing and play testing extensively. And as you said, it might not be take vengeance, but there's definitely cards out there with unexplored potential.
And for what it's worth, I don't think you guys are elitist Spikes. You're like way too friendly for that.
I know we got that comment once or twice, and now like I just find it funny, because anyone who's played me in real life or has met me in real life knows
Mike,
that
I think that person was probably joking though.
Oh no, there was someone who was very upset with us about trash talking a brew that was on the show.
Oh yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was but like anyone who knows me, like I show up to Pauper events with terrible decks. Adrian will attest to this. I have shown up
always
with
goes 2-2. Oh, that just never gets old.
That was like the biggest magic burn, man.
Mike's familiar
it's
with
not like
it.
he's it's not like he's used this one before.
Oh, you got you good.
And I will make the same joke that I always make, is that it's much more of a yoked ox situation most of the time,
Oh, I feel you.
But yeah, so I guess we're getting close to an hour. So Jeff, if there's anything you'd like to plug, obviously you've got your YouTube and your Twitch and all that. So I'll let you take care of that, and then we'll probably sign off for the episode. It was great having you on.
Yeah,
though.
thank you so much for having me, guys. So you can catch me on twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince every Monday and Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Atlantic time. On Monday night, we play decks that either top 8 really big tournaments or take out a deck that's been 5-0ing recently that I haven't seen a lot of. So it's competitive decks. We're trying to kind of like see that upper echelon of the Pauper metagame. And then on Tuesday, we do Possibly Pauper Playable, where I play new cards you heard a lot about throughout the podcast. And then I upload all of that stuff to YouTube on a fairly regular schedule. And if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you get a little bit of extra content. There's deck techs up there. I also do set reviews for every set that gets released. So I'm always on there. I'm on Twitter saying weird stuff about my life and posting bands I like. And I have a Discord, and you can find an invite to that on any of my videos. You can just Google Any New Province. I've gone to painstaking lengths so that you run into me somehow when you do that. But yeah, and keep listening to these guys. Especially go back to the episode of Color Commentary where they talk about organizing your paper collection, because that actually helped a lot while I was putting together paper Pauper decks.
Oh wow, that's an old one. That's a real out of the vault.
That was a real good episode. I feel like I really got to know you guys.
The fact that I'm completely anal and have everything sorted out by minutia, and Adrian's just like, they're in a box.
but like an organized box.
No,
Yeah.
it's not organized at all.
I think it was at the time. I don't know. Maybe you're putting
Oh,
it up
okay.
front, but it's a good episode.
My popper box is organized. My other boxes are not.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks for coming on the show, Jeff. It was great to have you on and, shine light on the side of Pauper that we don't always get to see quite so much on the show. And yeah, go check out his stuff. It is really good quality content.
Thank you so much, guys. I seriously appreciate it. It's been awesome to get to hang out with you. Seriously.
Thank you. All right, Adrian, you want to take us out of the show for the night?
Let's do it. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our patrons. I always say that wrong. Of which Jeff is one, but sorry, Jeff, I'm going to give the shout out today to Pyrison. That's our patron shout out for the day. Please consider supporting us just like them if you like the show. You can check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us, and we'll go ahead and link Jeff as well. We'd like to remind you, if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or an idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or you can email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS Pat's Games, Mike's LGS JP Comics, and of course the ever musically talented L. It is our theme song Quantitative and other great tracks. You can find them at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. So next week, this is Adrian and Mike and
Jeff.
we're signing off for Color Commentary.